It's kind of weird to think about it now, but there was a point in time where Microsoft wasn't really confident in its ability to break into the console market. The original Xbox, released in 2001, was part of the sixth console generation alongside the Sega Dreamcast, Sony PlayStation 2, and Nintendo GameCube, all three of whom were established competitors in the space at that point. We're currently in the ninth console generation if you're curious, but the sixth is especially notable because it was the last time major competitors both entered and exited the console wars. Namely, Microsoft broke in with Xbox and Sega fell out with the Dreamcast. However, like I said, Microsoft hadn't really known what kind of a console the Xbox was going to be necessarily, or what kinds of games its console would benefit the most from.
If you think of the different categories, the Windows platform has been strong for the intellectual, personal type games, role-playing type games. The consoles have been very strong where you just sit down on your couch and have a very visceral social experience. And both platforms have been strong for the action and adventure type games. These categories will expand, and every one of them we think is going to be very, very strong.
However, like I said, Microsoft hadn't really known what kind of a console the Xbox was going to be, or what kind of games its console would benefit the most from. Thankfully, if you're Microsoft, you just have unlimited money as a consequence of your decades of wildly anti-competitive practices, so you can just buy your way into winning the console wars. A strategy that, if you've kept up with Microsoft today, is still alive and well. Back in the early 2000s, their approach was to basically try everything once and see what would stick. They wanted to cast a wide net, either trying to produce games that could establish them in the popular genres of the day, or could provide direct, specific competitors to popular games on other consoles. Sometimes this meant buying up developers who could fill that niche, but in other cases they worked with independent studios to produce games that Microsoft Game Studios would then publish and market. If you look at the original Xbox's launch titles, you can kind of see what I mean. There's a little bit of everything, although there is a definite bias towards sports and racing. With 21 games that Wikipedia lists as having a North American release date of November 15th, 2001, which is the console's release date, 15 fit one of those two genres, with probably the big hit of that bunch as far as exclusives go being Project Gotham Racing. However, there was still representation for other genres that did pretty decently. Dead or Alive 3 was a fighting game, Fusion Frenzy was a party game, and Oddworld Munch's Odyssey was a platformer. That being said, if you know anything about this stuff, you know it was Halo Combat Evolved that absolutely blew up for the original Xbox, guaranteeing the success of the console and becoming a dominant franchise for Microsoft's gaming division for years to come. But game development isn't limited to the launch titles, and Xbox didn't just immediately drop every other project just because Halo became a money printing machine. They kept up their shotgun approach to genres to their in-house publisher, Microsoft Game Studios, to try and keep covering those bases. One of which is a pretty specific niche that both Nintendo and Sony at the time had some grips on: hover car racing games. Nintendo had F-Zero and Sony had Wipeout, with the latter of those being the one that Microsoft really wanted to take on. Coincidentally, a few years before the Xbox came out, some of the developers of the original Wipeout game had left Psygnosis and formed a new company, Curly Monsters. They pitched a Wipeout competitor to Microsoft, and Microsoft took them up on the offer. That game, originally pitched as Neon, was released in 2002 as Quantum Redshift, and it was a commercial failure so rough that Curly Monsters ended up closing up shop less than a year later. This video is going to be about Quantum Redshift, what it was, why it was good, and what went wrong. But before that, channel stuff, and I promise to keep it short. A couple hours after this video goes live, I'm going to be doing a charity livestream where I play through the whole game from a fresh save until I've beaten the hardest difficulty with all 16 of the game's playable characters. I have absolutely no idea how long that's going to take, but I'm going to go until I'm done. 100% of the revenue from that livestream, as well as 50% of the revenue from this video, will all be donated to the AltView Foundation in Sherwood Park, an organization that works to provide resources to queer people in rural Alberta. Alberta recently re-elected a hard-right government whose elected representatives have called trans kids, quote, shit cookies that contaminate the rest of the kids in a school, and whose leader once led the Lake of Fire party, so nicknamed because it was where her candidates believed gays and lesbians would spend all of eternity. Queer Albertans, especially rural ones, could use some support, so I'm hoping to be able to raise a few bucks for us. Also, to be clear, revenue means everything that'll show up on the revenue page for my analytics for the video and the live stream. AdSense and YouTube Premium revenue, plus super thanks, super chats, and channel memberships purchased either on the video or the live stream will count toward that number, and will continue to be counted throughout the month of June. Also, speaking of channel memberships, if you decide to purchase one during the live stream, you'll also be just under the wire to vote for this month's Members' Choice poll. There are 4 topics that members are choosing between, and the poll closes at midnight Mountain Time on June 10th, with the winning topic coming out on or around June 23rd. Members also get emotes and badges, and if you buy a membership by clicking on the join button on this video or the live stream, you're also supporting a really good cause, so it's a win for everybody. Now that that's out of the way though, let's talk about Part 1. What is Quantum Redshift? In the second section of this video, I'm going to go into specifically why this game is so great, but I wanted to start out with establishing what the game actually is in terms of its gameplay and the environment it existed in. It's genuinely a marvel of software engineering in a lot of ways in terms of the kinds of performance that Curly Monsters were pulling out of the original Xbox with a small team less than a year after the console came out. Like, This might not seem super impressive to us today in an era of ray tracing and 4K, but for reference, here's Quantum Redshift against Wipeout and F-Zero games that were released around the same time in that same console generation. Like, Quantum Redshift was hitting 60 FPS on a console that would set itself on fire if you tried to make it play modded Minecraft today, and I don't know, it's kind of cool. The game's soundtrack, which you may or may not have heard being used as background music in a few of my videos, was by a guy named JunkieXL, a Danish composer. Maybe it's just me, but I really like it. It gives like this really aggressively early 2000s energy that I just love. And maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, but it also really helps set the vibes of the game. You may have heard some of JunkieXL's work in movies, actually. He's composed a lot of scores for him, including recent stuff like both of the recent Sonic movies, Mad Max Fury Road, Deadpool, and a ton of others. Like, his Wikipedia page is a lot longer than I had expected when I was looking into him a little bit. But the music and the graphics aren't really what this is about. It is a really solid racing game by itself. Races are 6-person hovercar races at high speeds, with the number of laps, speed of the vehicles, and the aggressiveness of the computer-controlled enemies being determined by the difficulty. Every ship has a unique weapon system as well that can be upgraded with cash earned through racing, and the weapons are charged by collecting colored power-ups throughout the map. Red gems will power up a homing weapon, blue gems power up a non-homing weapon, and yellow gems power up a deployable overshield that can block incoming damage. Some weapons just do raw damage, while others apply minor status effects, like a slow or kind of disabling steering for a little bit. If a player fully upgrades a ship's weapons, they'll also get access to an ultimate attack, which deals a ton of damage but requires a lot of power-ups of all three kinds to charge it. If a racer takes too much damage, they're ejected from the race and automatically disqualified, and racers get bonus points for eliminating their opponents. Ships that have taken a lot of damage also bleed in a way that gets more intense the closer they get to death, and they can rebuild their shields by deploying their overshields. The game's tournament mode allows you to pick one racer and play on one of 5 difficulties: Novice, Adept, Expert, Master, and Redshift. The number of tracks in the tournament will be determined by the difficulty, starting at 2 and going as high as 9. There are 16 total characters, although only 7 are available when you first start the game, with the rest needing to be unlocked by either beating specific difficulties or winning tournaments with specific characters. Every racer has a ship with unique strengths and weaknesses, a home circuit in their home country, and a nemesis. The nemesis system is a big part of the game's appeal that I'm going to be talking about more later, but for now, let's just talk about how it plays out in terms of mechanics. The 16 characters in Quantum Redshift are paired up into 8 nemesis pairs based on some sort of pre-existing rivalry. The other racers that you'll face up against will change from race to race in a tournament, but your nemesis will always be present, and they will always be the toughest opponent. They hit the hardest, they have the best weapon system of all the computer-controlled characters, and they're worth extra points if you can hit or kill them. Each of the unlockable nemesis characters also uses a reversed version of their nemesis circuit, set at a different time of day with different power-up placements, and at the end of every tournament, aside from Novice and Redshift, you'll face off against them in a one-on-one race. Beating a tournament on Adept or higher with a character unlocks their nemesis to be played, and playing one of the nemesis characters just flips the script. Now the original character is the nemesis who will appear in every race. Lastly, for this section, the story of the game and the personality of the characters largely play out through these pre-race cutscenes between your character and the person whose circuit you're racing on. In a typical race, the other character will just kind of talk some trash at you while you listen, but if you're on your home circuit, it'll just be your character speaking, and if it's a nemesis challenge, then you'll have a back and forth with them that reveals a little bit more of the dynamic between them. So hopefully by now you get what Quantum Redshift is in theory, so that I can make the real sales pitch to you. Part 2. What makes Quantum Redshift great? Now, this section could easily go on for an hour, but I promise to try and keep it concise. The first thing is that the game is legitimately really pretty. It's certainly dated, but for a game that's about to turn 21 years old, it is holding up remarkably well. When it comes to the game's circuits, each map is immediately visually distinctive from one another, and the use of different times of day and weather conditions for nemesis circuits allows them to show off different elements of them and the characters who call them home. Fusoko City is the home circuit of Kimiko Nikaido, the daughter of a famous Quantum Redshift racer who's taken up his legacy, and her version of the map is a cool, exciting nightlife version. Her rival, Amy Nikaido, is also her sister. However, their father shunned Amy, leading her to developing some shady underground connections so she could work her way to the top the hard way. Her version of Fusoko City is set during the day, showing what the city actually looks like behind all the glitz and glam. Speaking of Kimiko and Amy, if we're being really real here, the characters are a big part of what makes this game so fun in my opinion, and I want it on the record, this game is high camp in terms of all the drama that's going on. The rivalry between Kimiko and Amy honestly feels like one of the more tame nemesis pairings. And to show you what I mean, we're going to go through each of them quickly. Tara Vivas, originally from Colombia, was once a chart-topping American pop star before one fatal day when she got behind the controls of her hovercar drunk, leading to her killing 2 people. Her music career died in the scandal, but she didn't want to give up the spotlight, so she decided to pursue a career as a racer instead. Her rival is Alicia Waverly, also an American, and the daughter of the people Tara killed, who is sworn to get revenge on her.
Everyone else may have forgiven you, Tara, but I never will. I'll make you pay.
I used to feel sorry for you, Waverly, but I'm all out of pity. You're going down.
My parents died because of you. I can beat you 100 times if I have to.
Prince Yuri Glitz, as he calls himself, is the Ukrainian-born heir to the old Russian Tsars, at least according to him, and has used his wealth to establish his own little fiefdom in the Cloud wastelands of Siberia, Russia, and establish his position in the quantum redshift circuit. His rival, Vladimir Ubikov, and I am not making this up, this is real, sees himself as the ultimate champion of the Russian people, whose goal is to establish a new and perfect version of communism where corrupt fraudsters like Glitz won't be able to run free.
Я ратую за твое поражение всем моим существом.
Ты недостоин вызова на состязание, плейбой. Все твои слова будут напрасны после того, как я тебя повергну.
Мое дело правое. Народ поддержит меня в героической борьбе за победу.
Next are Kimiko and Amy Nikaido, Japanese sisters who became rivals after their father chose Kimiko to become a successor over Amy. Kimiko is a national and international sensation, functionally an idol in the racing scene, while Amy is singularly driven by her ambition to destroy her sister. Amy built connections to the underworld of Japan to fund her career and emerged as a formidable competitor in her own right.
私はあなたと違って自分でレースのやり方を学んだの。過保護なパパに育てられたあなたとは違うの。家族を裏切っておいてよくそんなこと言えるわね。みんなあなたを憎んでるのよ。私がチャンピオンになったらみんな私の足元にひざまずかせてやるわ。
Zaki Shaheen used his family's wealth to buy a career in the quantum redshift circuits. Are you noticing a theme here? And he credits his abilities to the time he spent lost and wandering around the Egyptian desert. He fears only one thing, his mysterious masked nemesis, Pharaoh. Nobody knows who Pharaoh is or what his true aims are, but whatever they are, they seem to revolve around destroying Zaki Shaheen.
أنت سريع يا زكي ولكن اعترف أنت تخاف مني.
ليست لك الجرأة لمواجهتي يا فرعون.
لا يستطيع أحد أن ينقذك الآن. هذا السباق من نصيبي.
Jordan Reynolds is an Australian icon with a lot of mainstream success, and she's used her fame to lead campaigns to crack down on the illegal lower circuits in quantum redshift racing, where her nemesis, Kiri Foxton, cut her teeth. Right around the time that Kiri started posing a real threat to Jordan's status, Jordan's campaign coincidentally successfully got Kiri's mother indicted for running those illegal lower circuits, and Kiri was banned from national competition. Now that Kiri's cleared her name, though, she's out for revenge against Jordan.
You think you're so much better than everyone else, Jordan, but you're going down.
Jealousy won't help you win. Besides, I can't help it if I'm twice as good as you.
You talk too much. I'm going to shut you up for good.
Marcus Appleton was once the mechanic and lover of Jaya Kashala before he went on to dominate the British quantum redshift circuit, stealing her title after stealing her heart. Jaya was crushed, but stuck around and committed herself to getting her title back from Marcus, the lousy lover in her words, and reclaiming her rightful place at the top of the British quantum redshift circuit.
Everyone knows I'm the best pilot, Jaya, but isn't there room for both of us?
No room for treachery, Marcus. No room for you.
So be it. Remember that when I'm in the winner's circle without you.
Leah Matthias wasn't originally a racer, but her lover was, until a tragic accident on his, and now her, home circuit of Mount Graun in the Austrian Alps that claimed his life. She blames Max Steinauer, a veteran racer, for the accident. Quantum redshift is a deadly and dangerous sport, and at the age of 45 he is the second oldest racer in the league behind Vladimir. But he's determined to prove that not only was the accident not his fault, he's still at the top of his game all these years later.
Neben mir bist du nur ein unartiges kleines Kind. Du solltest wiederkommen, wenn du groß geworden bist.
Ein alter Mann wie du ist eine Bedrohung für die Fahrer auf der Strecke, Steinhauer. Geh in den Ruhestand, solange du noch laufen kannst.
Durch meine Erfahrung werde ich es schaffen. Du hast keine, darum wirst du untergehen.
Lastly, we've got Kage. He considers himself to be a god. Others consider him to be a cult leader at the top of a criminal empire. When the island of Draco erupted in the middle of the Pacific, he bought it up and turned it into his own little kingdom, complete with quantum redshift circuit. His rival is the mysterious Kutu. Nobody knows who Kutu is, the origin of the nanotechnology he's enhanced by, or how he manages to morph into a hovercar for the purposes of racing, but he scares the shit out of Kage. And honestly, pretty much everyone else, which, fair play, pretty understandable.
I have grown far beyond your worst fears. I'm your destruction incarnate.
Now, I've seen other reviews talk about these characters just being forgettable or whatever, but to me, and I'll admit that this is maybe just nostalgia because I've been playing this game since I was about 4 years old, they are amazing. Like, the sheer drama, the camp of it all is incredible to me. Alicia Waverly is furiously stomping around and telling Tara she'll pay for killing her parents, and Tara's just like, yeah, and who are you? Yuri's calling himself a prince, and Vladimir is the champion of 22nd century Russian communism, and the two of them are dueling it out to determine Russia's fate in a hover car tournament. Kimiko and Amy have some genuine personal conflict between them, and it leads to some really fun drama whenever they interact with each other. Zaki's a pretentious asshole to everyone he meets about how long he could survive in the desert and how they could never do what he did. But when it comes to Pharaoh, he doesn't know what to do, and Pharaoh knows it. Jordan's this classic mean girl sitting at the top of the world using whatever underhanded tricks she needs to keep a genuine underdog like Kiri from threatening her status. And Kiri, who's built herself from the ground up, looks at Jordan and sees the problem with everything about how the system runs. Marcus tries to be conciliatory with Jaya, who is just entirely unreceptive to it. And it makes sense. Marcus got everything. He got the girl, he got the job, and then when he decided he was tired of the girl and the job, he dumped them both and took the championship. Like, of course he's able to move on, he got what he wanted. But Jaya wants to right the wrong and knock him down a peg. Leah doesn't care about racing as a sport. She's really only in it to hold on to something from her ex-lover and get revenge on Max for his death. And Max needs to fight her off to prove that he's still got it. Kahakili is an opportunistic cultist taking advantage of Pacific Islander symbolism, imagery, and culture to try and position himself, his wealth, and his enterprises as untouchable. Untouchable, that is, until a ghost from his past in the form of Kutu shows up to expose his criminal behavior and bring him to justice. Also, I feel like I need to mention this, everyone in this game is hot, and the game doesn't really shy away from acknowledging it. Like, I've always hated playing as Yuri in this game because his ship handles like ass in my opinion, but I would be absolutely lying if I said he wasn't probably the first male crush I think I had on anyone ever, fictional or otherwise. Which, upon reviewing the footage, may be a tiny little bit embarrassing to reckon with, but we're moving on from this. The game itself is a lot of fun and handles really well. You can really feel the differences between the different ships and how well or poorly they're suited to different circuits, reflecting that some of them are specialists like Leo or Marcus, while others are more all-purpose like Tara and Kiri. As well, kind of just a fun little feature is that each race does the 3, 2, 1, go countdown in the local language with a local announcer, which always just felt like a neat touch. Especially because, as it turns out, they don't just use like the Google Translate easiest literal translations. Like, okay, for Mount Ground, the announcer is German, and this is their countdown. Los isn't the most literal translation for go in German, from what I can find at least. It's more like let's go or get going. It's kind of like a colloquial slang type of thing. Go is also presented in the appropriate language when applicable. If your announcer is Russian, Japanese, or Egyptian, the word go is not only translated in their speech, but displayed in the proper alphabet. The only exception is for the Draco Island announcer, who makes the announcement in Hawaiian. Hawaiian, like a lot of indigenous languages around the world, doesn't have a native written alphabet. Instead of trying to anglicize the word hele or put it in an alphabet that it doesn't belong in, they instead just leave it spoken, which, I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. It also kind of reflects that Kahakili, who is the home racer on this circuit, isn't really part of this culture. He's a billionaire appropriating a mishmash of Polynesian and Pacific Islander cultures to lend himself an air of mysticism as a part of his efforts to build a cult with himself at the center, and even his speech patterns and design reflect that this is kind of just a performance for him. And look, I know it might feel like I'm glazing over the gameplay stuff here, but in reality, you've been watching the gameplay in the background for a lot of this. You can see what it looks like and how it handles, and the speed that's involved in this whole thing. It's also important to note that characters bring different types of weapons that enable different playstyles. Some characters, like Amy, prioritize being able to hit multiple targets. Others, like Leah, focus on single target damage. Honestly, the only real criticism I have of the gameplay side of things is that enemy racers aren't really as smart as they could be. They don't use overshields unless they're already at low health, at which point they burn them as soon as they pick them up until they get out of the danger zone. They rarely use their weapons on each other or you, compared to how easily you might use them. And even the Nemesis rarely has weapons on par with you. You can pretty easily fully upgrade a ship by the end of an expert level tournament at the latest, but the Nemesis won't even get their ultimate until Master, and the AI at large won't unlock theirs until Redshift. To be fair, they are a lot better at holding the racing line than the human players are going to be though, which I'm guessing is the reason why they're not usually as aggressive with their weapons. You know, it kind of balances it out. Anyways, hopefully by now you at least understand the broad strokes of the pitch that someone can make for Quantum Redshift. It's a fun racing game with a couple solid gameplay gimmicks that looks pretty and has some interesting characters and stories. So, what happened? Part 3. Why Quantum Redshift flopped. The too long didn't watch answer to the question of what happened to Quantum Redshift is just Microsoft. Microsoft's interference with the project was a source of immense frustration to Curly Monsters by all accounts. The $1 million deal signed between them and Microsoft Game Studios put creative direction for the game itself in the developers' hands, but marketing and promotional stuff fell under Microsoft's purview because they were financing the whole thing. This meant that while things like gameplay and cutscenes were up to Curly Monsters, the game's box art, intro cinematics, stuff like that went to Microsoft. Now, before we get fully properly into trashing Microsoft here, I do want to point out they weren't always a complete liability to this game. Specifically, they connected Curly Monsters with Junkie XL for the soundtrack and Satoshi Ueda for cinematics and in-game assets, both of which were good gets for a tiny studio. However, the fuckery really comes from the marketing of the game, and we're going to go from the least egregious to the most egregious here. So I had mentioned at the start that this game was originally named Neon, but was switched to Quantum Redshift to avoid a potential lawsuit from Chrysler over their vehicle model of the same name. Fine, whatever it happens, it's not really Microsoft's fault, and personally I think Quantum Redshift works better anyways. Neon sounds, honestly, generic and uninteresting, like the kind of game you'd see people playing in a movie where the production company didn't want to license a real game. Quantum Redshift kinda means nothing, but at the same time, it still sounds futuristic and exciting, you know? Anyways, like I said, that's a minor thing, and it isn't really Microsoft's fault. However, they also interfered with the intro cinematic, which is going to be playing in the background for a little bit. In the in-game cinematics, Quantum Redshift was presented with more of a serious, cool, realistic-ish art style and the style of gameplay itself, something that Microsoft completely abandoned in favor of a comic book-style intro. It was a totally different art style, and in the eyes of the developers, completely undermined the game's vibe. And while I think that the comic book style isn't itself a problem, the choices made with it kinda sometimes were. Like, my guess is that some characters were still having their designs finalized when the intro was being made, because I have absolutely no goddamn idea who this is supposed to be. I'm assuming Leah, but only really because nobody else looks even remotely similar and everyone else is featured throughout at some point. It also does kind of spoil the existence of Kutu, a character you don't actually see in-game until you unlock Kahekili in the race against him, which takes a good few hours. However, none of that even holds a candle to the box art, which was so hideous that the developers pretty much single-handedly credit it with killing their game's prospect stone dead. Neil Thompson, who was one of the 2 art directors for the game, did an interview with Eurogamer about it in 2017 where he's still pissed about it. And instead of trying to communicate it myself, I'm just going to read his quotes from the article so you can get a vibe of what's going on here. This is the cover of the game that shipped. If anyone thinks this is a nice piece of art, we'll fight about it outside. This is a piece of shit. It was a disgrace. We were desperately unhappy and they realized that. Even now, I cannot reconcile why they would pick that piece of art. It was truly nasty. I'm not going to name names. I know who was responsible for it. I was immensely disappointed. Lee, who was the other art director with me, we were livid. Absolutely livid. But what do? It's tough. They pay the bills. Subtle. Also, according to his Twitter, Neil now lives in Edmonton, Alberta. Does that actually matter to this story? No. But I thought it was really cool to see that one of the people responsible for one of my favorite games ended up living in the same province as me, and I wanted to include it. Now, just like everything else related to this game, I have some nostalgia clouding my vision. You know, I don't hate the box art as much as he does. But being fully objective, it's a dogshit cover. It's the kind of box art that only someone who's had a hyperfixation with the game in question for 20 years could love. And even then, love is a strong word. It's a bad piece of box art. And like Thompson says, it's hard to understand to this day why they'd go with it. And it probably legitimately did sewer the game. Like, this was a new IP that nobody really knew much about, and the box art doesn't exactly scream like, hey guys, here's something that you should be paying full AAA RRSP for. Even Microsoft kind of tacitly admitted that they fucked this up. And it brings us to one of the more interesting pieces of trivia about this game. Microsoft apparently allowed Curly Monsters to produce their own original box art for it, that fans could print at home as a replacement. However, I have looked at this box art for the last fucking decade, and I have been unable to find any evidence of its actual existence. It's repeatedly cited as fact in articles and on Wikipedia, and nobody disputes it, but I've never been able to find the actual artwork, and I desperately want to. And you know what? Now I have a platform to maybe mobilize to help me find this thing. First person in my Twitter DMs with this artwork and proof that it's the real deal gets $50 via PayPal or some sort of equivalent reward, whatever. I will gladly pay out of pocket for this. The curiosity surrounding it has been killing me forever, and I just need to know. Quantum Redshift was also inherently climbing an uphill battle. This specific micro-genre of futuristic hover car racers wasn't, like, oversaturated necessarily, but the format was well established by the time the game came out. It couldn't really break new ground either, because by definition it was supposed to take what Wipeout had done and do it better. Which, I would argue it did. In the Eurogamer article from earlier, it also cited the review of it from the time, where they said, it's by no means a screaming must-have release, for the simple reason that games like this have been done to death, and many veterans may feel they're retreading old ground. On the other hand, Quantum Redshift is easily the best game of its type. It's by far the best looking, plays brilliantly, and has huge replay value thanks to the upgrade system. Quantum Redshift was nothing new, but it didn't need to be something new. It was the best at what it did. The problem is that Quantum Redshift needed the kind of marketing that could communicate that, and instead, Microsoft screwed it over with bad marketing and then made that Curly Monsters problem. They cancelled the sequel that had originally been part of their contract, and the studio eventually closed down, with Microsoft holding onto the rights but refusing to do anything with them. The one game in the franchise has only been made backwards compatible up to the Xbox 360 as well, meaning that the hardware to play the game is getting less and less accessible. Also, as established, it wasn't a super popular game, which, again, fuck Microsoft, meaning it's not the kind of game that's easy to find ROMs for, or even find an extra copy for on eBay for a reasonable price. It's the kind of game that could very easily one day simply cease to be accessible. I also really want to stress at this point that Curly Monsters made this game with less than 10 people in-house. Like, even if this game only had middling sales, they pulled off something insane that Microsoft should have leaned into. This game was hitting 60 FPS and looking stunning at a time when its competitors genuinely couldn't hold a candle to it. And it played great to boot. If they'd reasonably invested in it and understood the value of developing their IP, it could have evolved into something great. The problem is that Microsoft, like all corporations, doesn't like to have to consider the long term. They want short-term gains. The reason why a ton of great original Xbox games like Quantum Redshift were just left for dead. A brand new competitor to the console market with a range of brand new franchises didn't want to have to spend the time trying to develop them. It wanted every game to be Halo, and when they weren't, because Halo is like a once-in-a-generation game, they tended to just scrap them. However, since they hold on to the rights to those games, the developers can't try their hand at a new, better version of it without publisher interference. Like, there's no way to see what Quantum Redshift 2 might have looked like if Microsoft had been out of the picture and Curly Monsters could have worked on it with a bigger team and more resources. Or what Quantum Redshift 2 could have looked like even with Microsoft, because by all accounts it was a good game just screwed over by marketing. The flop of Quantum Redshift caused Curly Monsters to close its doors, as I said. They couldn't afford to keep the doors open without remortgaging their homes, so they decided to just cut their losses and move on. To me, the biggest thing is that this whole situation is just a shame. It's a shame that Curly Monsters weren't allowed to fully realize their artistic vision. It's a shame that they worked so hard on this project only for Microsoft to come in and serve up a piece of heinous box art that they knew would screw over their game. It's a shame that, in the grand scheme of things, there will likely never be a second game in this series. Microsoft holds the IP, not the creators, and Microsoft is content to let it collect dust in a metaphorical warehouse for the rest of the time. It's a shame that, because of how quickly software and hardware both become outdated and incompatible, games like Quantum Redshift will eventually disappear into the ether. Quantum Redshift hasn't been playable on either of the last two console generations for Xbox, and I can't imagine that changing anytime soon. Even now, only 20 years out from its release, it's becoming hard to find concrete proof of things like that alternate cover that was released alongside it. Most of all, though, it's a shame that a genuinely good game got sewered by a series of bad corporate decisions. Not just because it sucks for the developers and artists who put their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, but also because it sucks for the people who probably would have genuinely enjoyed the game if it had been given a fair shot. Like, if you can find a copy out there and still have a console that can play it, I really do recommend it. It's a campy, fun, pretty racing game with a lot of charm, and you'd get to have a pretty rare experience playing it today. However, failing that, you can also come and watch the charity livestream that'll be starting at 4 PM Mountain Time today to see literally the entire game, or at least as much of it as I'm going to be playing. The link to that will be in the description, but for now, thank you very much for watching this video. Remember that 100% of the revenue from that live stream, as well as 50% of the revenue from this video for the month of June, will be going to the Altview Foundation to support queer rural Albertans. And if you choose to buy a membership to donate, you can also vote between these 4 topics to become the next Member's Choice video. Also, the Clue video from last month is still on the way, I promise. I'm working on the 3rd version of that video now to try and come up with something that I can make that YouTube won't flag to death for copyright, because apparently fair use on YouTube just doesn't exist. Also, thank you very much to my channel members. Insert name here, Kage the Orc, Oelesp, Nballs, TheAfroOfDoom, SurturZ, Wurraan, gvost, Kirby PPG, Alex Stone, Nebby NDD, nemothesurvivor, Sebastian Snow Miller, Dysprosiie, Shiver, Squidgeey, Cameton, MiniQ, Enso_exe, Mckaig, Lenni, Aiden Radak, Checkmate77, Remi Starlight, dxstiny, Bennett, Vamplin, Snek, Connor, Sirco, Yoshi of the Wire, Naturebig Fan, Damp Weasel, andPeggy, Windex the Great, CatLover192, Connor M, Sourdough, and Hermano. Thank you all for your support. And thank you again for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.